Hello, thank you very much for tuning in. This is Stuart, classical record collector. I used to do quite a bit of dealing back in the 90s and probably early 2000s. I'm dealing once again, but just on a small scale because I've got another business besides records, and that's what I make most of my money out of. And I just sell a few records to try and pay for my hobby, which I'm glad to say that after dealing for all those years, of course, I started off as a collector and I started dealing. I always remained a collector throughout, and of course, I'm still a collector. And but I just thought I would talk about something which I thought you might find interesting because I was watching a video today, and there's a lady who's got a vinyl channel, and she was questioning why vintage classical records, the ones that she wants to buy, are so expensive. And she asked a dealer, and the dealer told her various reasons why vintage records cost what they do, what is involved in actually buying and acquiring these records. Now, times have changed quite a lot, of course, because we've got eBay, we've got online, we've got Discogs, and um, it's much easier for probably classical collectors to sell their own records now than it ever was before. If you've got records that you want to sell, you can generally find out more or less what they're worth by just going onto eBay and checking. But of course, back in the 90s, there was no such thing as eBay. The internet was still very young, and people by and large, if they had a collection to sell, they contacted a dealer to do that. And I was a dealer from, let me see now, from about 1992 until the year 2000. So a good stretch of time, I suppose. And I was also dealing in the at a time when I suppose the country was awash with records, relatively speaking. So of course, from my previous videos, you'll know that I had a shop in Nottingham. I had that shop for about 2 years. I then sold it to my father, of all people, and I specialized in more or less the high value classical records, collectibles. And I operated my business from home, and I had various means and methods for buying classical records. I'd let my shop go. So obviously, at one time, I was getting in collections through my shop. And when I sold my shop, that was no longer the case because my father, who bought the shop from me, was, of course, buying in those records, and I was doing my own thing. So I had several methods of buying records, and I think that I was quite successful in terms of buying records in. So I'm going to go through some of those methods that I used to buy in. So actually, I've just thought of another one. Let me just write that down. Yeah. Okay. So basically, let's start with. Let me see. What should we do? Okay. So there's a magazine called Gramophone Magazine. Many of you probably know about it. It's been around for a long time. I think it's the leading classical CD and record and recording magazine in the UK, if not maybe in the world. I don't know. But in the 90s, Gramophone magazine was where all the classical dealers advertised. So there was a classified section at the back of the magazine, and you could put a small ad in there for about maybe, I don't know, £30 a month. And because dealers were dotted around the country, if people generally will go to whoever is the closest dealer, there were some who would phone around, some collectors would phone around, or they would send their list around. If I got a list of records, because in my ad I would put my number, my name, my business name, and in those days I called myself Classical 33 when I was focusing on high value collectible records. I called myself Classical 33. I thought it was quite a good name. 33 RPM, and I deal in classical. And I had a website, classical33.co.uk. I gave it up at some point, and somebody's now taken that name, which is a shame because I would like to have had it back, but never mind. Yeah. So I advertised something along the lines of classical record collections bought, good cash prices paid. Please telephone for more details. And then my telephone number, and also sometimes my address. Now, I can tell you that if somebody sent me a list of records unsolicited, I can't remember a single occasion when I successfully managed to buy a collection if a list of records had been sent to me. I generally did not respond because I knew that that list was going around the country, and I knew that whoever was selling that collection could potentially end up with a top dollar price. And I didn't want to pay a top dollar price. I let other dealers do that. I didn't want to go in. It's a big deal to travel to see records, particularly if you're going 100 miles and you're going to get there and you're going to look through and you're going to make an offer. And then the seller is going to say, well, I'll think about it. No, that I wasn't prepared to do that. I was only prepared to and go in and make an offer and try and bargain on the spot and get a deal. I wasn't prepared. I usually, if somebody phoned me and said, okay, I've got a collection to sell, I would generally, first of all, let's imagine that it's somebody that lives, I don't know, let's imagine them that they're not local. Let's say they live 150 miles away. Okay. Now a 300-mile round trip is a long way to go for absolutely nothing. It really is. And I've done that trip for nothing as well. I did it once or twice in the early days. I learned my lesson, and research is everything. You've got to find out up front what the seller has got. So if somebody phones me up, says, we've got a collection, I ask a number of questions. First question, how many records are there? Now, this is funny because if I say how many records are there, they say, just a minute, I'll tell you. So, oh no. Oh no. And then I hear them in the background counting 1, 2, 3, 4. I know that. I'm almost laughing in the background because I know there's not going to be more than about 15, 20 records. And if they came back and say, oh, I've got 18, I'd say, okay, look, I don't buy small collections. Thanks anyway. I advise that you take them to a local charity shop or something like that. I wouldn't even ask them what they've got because there's just no point. It's highly unlikely that somebody with 18 records, if you ask them, oh, what have you got? Oh, SXL 2260, Joanna Marzi 33X, the 3 record box set. No, that's not going to happen. I wouldn't even bother entertaining that. If somebody's got, if somebody had less than 100 records generally, I would say, and if they lived like 10 miles away, yeah, I'd go and see them. But if they lived any distance, I would say I only buy large collections, say 200 or 300 or 500 at least. So yeah, find out how many they've got first. And then if they pass that test, then the next question would be, did you buy all of them yourself? Say, yes, I did. Then you would say, when were you buying them? When were you active as a buyer? And they say, well, let me see. I got my stereo system in 1978. And I would think, oh dear, that's outside the sort of high value golden period. That's not going to be, unless they live locally, it's not going to be worth looking at. But if they say, oh, started buying when I was a young boy. Well, yeah, I mean a teenager. When were you a teenager? And this person is maybe 75 years old. That looks promising. If it's 1995, it means that he was buying, back in the 50s. And he said all the way through, I got an early stereo system and I was paying like £2 and 3 shillings for Decca SXLs in those days. Then great. Or if, having trouble getting the information out of the seller, I would say, look, go and grab a handful of records, go and grab maybe 20, 30 records and bring them to the phone. So they would do that. And I would say, right, flip them over. And in the top right-hand corner, there should be a number. And, some old man is saying, oh, you mean like, ASD or, CFP. Yeah, my heart would sink if the first one was like CFP, whatever, or MFP. Yeah, my heart would certainly sink. So yeah, that wouldn't be very good if that was the case, but they would start reading them out. And if they hadn't got to anything interesting by 10 records, it wasn't looking good. And if they went 20 records without anything interesting, then I would invariably stop them and I would say, look, thanks for calling, but you've not really got what I'm looking for. And then they would say, well, what are you looking for? And I would say, well, early stereos, SXL, SAX, SB, etc. And then the call would be over and I would give them some advice, maybe put them in an auction house or something like that. Yeah, so I would only go out and travel a distance if they passed the phone test, which would mean they would have to say, yeah, like for example, I don't know, SXL 22 whatever, or um, ASD, I don't know, 55 whatever, or that kind of thing, where I could see they had early stereos. That's what you really look. That's what we were really looking for in those days, is early stereos. If they hadn't got those and they got monos, they would say, well, what monos have you got? And if they hadn't got any sort of interesting violin monos or Furtwänglers or that kind of thing, and they went through 30 records and there was nothing interesting there, then that was it. I wouldn't bother going to look at them. But if there was something there, then I was prepared to drive and take a bit of a risk and go and look. And that more or less always paid off. I mean, for example, I went all the way from Nottingham up to Aberdeen on the train. A gentleman called me from Aberdeen. He had only 500. Yeah, too far to go really, Nottingham to Aberdeen. But when he started reading them out, they were all early stereos. You know, I mean, he read out maybe 30 odd, and every second record was like, I don't know, SXL this, SXL 2000, or SXL 6000, SAX 2250. It was like that. And I thought, well, this is a no-brainer. And he said, what do you pay for them? And I said, well, the kind of records that you're reading out, um, I generally pay about 10 to 20 pounds a piece for them. And if they're really special, I could go up to 50 pounds a piece for them. So until I visit you, I don't know, but it looks kind of promising. I'll bring with me maybe £1,000 in cash. And, I could guarantee based on what you've said, I'll be able to spend at least £500, I think, and maybe even more than that. And he invited me up. So I went up on the train to Aberdeen. I remember actually, funnily enough, because at Aberdeen station, the train for some bizarre reason stopped 100 meters before the platform and for some strange reason was stuck there for an hour. It was really frustrating. I wanted to just get out of the train, but he picked me up from the train station. I stayed overnight in a guest house or something, and I had fish and chips with him in his house with his family. He went out and bought local fish and chips. I mean, that was one of the really nice kind of experiences that I had as a dealer. And I went through his records, and I gave him what I thought was quite a fair price. I wasn't in the business to rip people off and to give people a pound each for expensive stereo records. I would say to them, look, my kind of markup on these is um, about 200, 300%. Um, but that sounds like a lot. But the reason is that it takes a long time to sell them, catalog them, travel to buy them, etc. So he said, "Oh yeah, I understand all that's fine." I was usually upfront with people about how I work out what records are worth to me, and if I was giving them a good chunk of money, they were generally satisfied with that. So that was fine. I did know dealers who went in to try and buy records like that for hardly anything at all, but I wanted to give people as fair a price as I possibly could because I appreciated that they'd bought the best quality records when they were buying as collectors, and I only thought it was right that they should get some reasonable return back, and it was my job then to try and convert these records into the highest prices by marketing them. So yeah, it generally worked out if I did my research up front. If I didn't do my research up front, there were occasions when I decided to take a chance on it. Like somebody from Bath might call me. I thought, oh, I fancy a trip down to Bath. Somebody phones with 1,500 records. And I thought, oh, I fancy a trip so much down to Bath, I won't even bother asking them what they've got. So go down, and go in, and straight away I realized, oh my God, this is going to be a waste of time. It's all opera, it's all organ music, it's all choral music, it's all bloody harpsichord music, it's early music like Thomas Tallis, or it's all saga. It's all pie and budget labels and records that I really just could not sell, and I was struggling to find my way through them. And maybe and people, if somebody's got a big collection of 1,500 and you can maybe find only 20 records for 100 quid, more often than not they weren't prepared to sell them. So I came unstuck on some occasions when I didn't do my research. All right, I had a nice day driving down to Bath, but I mean, I wouldn't have been in Bath in the first place if it hadn't been for business reasons. Yeah, okay, so that was one method I used, and that was probably my most successful method. But generally, yeah, always research up front, and it would usually pay dividends. And I did quite well out of that. So, yeah, the other method I used besides advertising and gramophone was local newspaper advertising. And I could reach out. I lived in Nottingham. I advertised in the Nottingham Evening Post, Leicester Mercury, Stoke Sentinel. Now, I had some good collections out of Stoke. I remember one guy, I went out to see him in Stoke from an ad in the Stoke Sentinel. And yeah, he had some good ones. He only had about 500, but he had maybe 50 early stereos. He also had a lot of film music. So I said, 10 to 15 pounds each for the early stereos, and maybe I could take the whole lot of you as well and give you a bit extra. And he said, oh, they're my brothers, I'll have to have a chat with him. And I said, all right, fair enough. I wasn't really too happy, but anyway, what could I do? I drove away, and he called me the next day. He says, well, I've spoken to my brother, and I think we might be able to do a deal, but I said, yeah, what's the but? And he said, do you mind if I keep the film soundtracks? I said, yeah, don't worry, mate. You can keep the film soundtracks. No trouble at all. Yeah, so I did all right out of local advertising. And, if it was a local, like 5 miles away, I would usually go out even without asking them questions. So that wasn't really a problem if I didn't find much. Yeah, so what else did I do? Yeah, there were shops that I used to visit around the country. There were a couple of shops in London I used to like going to. Gramex was one of them. Notting Hill Gate was another one. And then, there were some other shops in London. There was a guy in Hove that I used to go to who had a place on the platform. He was selling records from there. And there was Yarborough House near, where was that? Gloucestershire, I think. And, there were various places dotted around the country, shops that I used to go into. And of course, it would cost me more, but I would still manage to do okay. And then there were some sort of dealers who would not sell direct to the Japanese and the Koreans and all the others that pay the big prices. And I would go to them and pay them quite a high price for their best records. And I wouldn't make as good a margin, but it was nice to have them. I wanted to have as many as possible of the important records so that when I had a Japanese dealer visiting, my stock looked good. I had hundreds of early stereos, I had hundreds of SXL 2000s, and I would just absolutely blow them away with the amazing selection that I had. They would want to come back to me, even if I'd paid a lot of money from other dealers to have these records. I'd rather have them because I really wanted to impress people that came to me. And just to give you an idea of how much I was capable of selling and how much stock I had, there was a dealer from Japan, a very nice chap, who stayed in a hotel near to me for 3 days. And he came to my house. I had records in my house, 20 odd thousand. I had a couple of rooms devoted to them, well organized. And this was 1997, when money's worth more then than it was now. And I probably shouldn't say this, but he spent 3 days with me, and he bought £18,000 worth of records after the discount, and he paid me in brand new £20 notes. I had an absolute stack of money sitting on my kitchen units after he left, and I can't believe I had that much money in those days. I mean, that was like double that amount of money now, taking into account inflation into account, Plus I was selling through my catalog, and you know, I mean, I should be rich now. I'm not rich. Why am I not rich? Well, the reason being, of course, I got married in 2002, and I mean, my marriage must have cost me at least £1 million or more with all the money I spent on it. And then, of course, eBay came along. I stopped sort of dealing in records. I went into something else. But no, I mean, I did well, and I had lots of money at the time, and I had some great times. Yeah, talking about times, I also even advertised. I was quite creative in the way that I tried to buy in records. I advertised in the Times in the 90s, and I used to get letters from people, and then I would reply saying, "This is what I'm looking for." And I actually managed to buy a copy of uh, Carl Bohm conducting the Magic Flute on a red folder SXL early pressing. Very rare. I've never even seen that. I've seen it in the box, but I've only ever had the folder once, you know, the red folder version. And I think I paid about £100 for that. And yeah, believe me, I sold it for a lot more, many times, many more times that. And it was in really good condition as well. So I had some success in advertising in national newspapers even. Um, Auctions, yeah, I went to auctions. I sometimes got to an auction where there was a big collection where I was unopposed, and I was able to buy really good records for hardly anything. And on another occasion, I went to an auction where there was a fantastic collection and I had competition. I still got everything, but I had to pay through the nose to have it. That's just how it goes. So anyway, that's kind of about it in terms of an overview of how I used to buy in records. But don't begrudge there's a lot of these high prices that the dealers are charging, because believe me, they do a lot of hard work to get hold of them, and they also get stuck with a lot of records. So yeah, I mean, obviously that lady who had her own channel, she realized that why these records cost so much money. And another reason they cost so much money is that sometimes I had to buy in a whole collection, and I would get stuck with 2 or 3 thousand really run-of-the-mill records that I had to do something with, just to get my hands on maybe 50 or 100 really good records. And it was hard. It was hard work, very, very hard work. Okay, well, I better stop the video there. I've gone on a bit too long, but I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll be back again with another video very soon. Bye for now.